The words blurred through my tears as I sat on the floor of my mother's attic, dust motes dancing in the slanted afternoon light. I regret the day Clara was born, the elegant cursive read, and David agrees with me. My hands trembled so violently that the diary nearly slipped from my grasp. 32 years of memory shattered in that single moment, like glass hitting concrete. The air grew thick, suffocating, and I couldn't draw a proper breath. Let me tell you how it happened, because no one else knows the truth yet. Before that afternoon in the attic, my life had been a carefully constructed illusion of love and belonging. I grew up in a 2-story colonial on Maple Street, the kind of house with a wraparound porch and window boxes bursting with seasonal flowers. Our home smelled perpetually of my mother Evelyn's baking cinnamon in autumn, vanilla in winter, lemon in spring. She was the kind of mother who made everything seem magical, who could turn a rainy afternoon into an adventure with nothing more than a blanket fort and hot chocolate with too many marshmallows. My father David was quieter, but his love felt just as real. He was the one who taught me to ride a bike, who stayed up late helping me with math homework I didn't understand, who fixed my broken toys with steady hands and infinite patience. I remember the weight of his hand on my shoulder, the warmth of it seeping through my jacket as we walked to school on cold mornings. "You're my special girl," he'd say, and I believed him completely. Our family rituals were the foundation of my childhood. Sunday dinners with roast chicken and Evelyn's famous apple pie. Summer vacations at the same cabin by the lake where David taught me to fish. Christmas mornings with stockings hung by the fireplace, Evelyn humming carols as she prepared breakfast. These weren't just routines, they were the language of love in our home, the way we said, "I care," without speaking the words. I had friends, Mira from next door, who I'd known since we were 5, Thomas, my first crush in 7th grade, and later, Harper, who became my college roommate and closest confidant. But my family was my anchor, the one constant in a world that sometimes felt uncertain. When I was 16 and Myra's parents divorced, I came home and cried in Evelyn's lap. She stroked my hair and said, "Family is forever, sweet girl. We're the people who never leave." The irony of those words would later feel like a knife twisting in my gut. Even as I grew older and moved away for college, the bond remained. Weekly phone calls with Evelyn, holiday visits home, David's occasional emails with fatherly advice and bad jokes. When I graduated, they hosted a party in our backyard, beaming with pride as if I'd won the Nobel Prize. "We always knew you'd do great things," Evelyn whispered as she hugged me, her perfume mixing with the scent of freshly cut grass. When I met Nathan at 27 and decided to marry him a year later, they welcomed him into the family with open arms. David helped Nathan pick out the engagement ring. Evelyn threw us an engagement party that was the talk of their social circle. At our wedding, David gave a speech that made everyone cry, talking about how his little girl had grown into a woman he was proud to call his daughter. "Clara has always been our greatest blessing," he said, and Nathan squeezed my hand as tears streamed down my face. Even after Nathan and I had our own children, first Lily, then Noah, the connection remained strong. Evelyn and David doted on their grandchildren, transforming their guest room into a magical space with toys and books and a small bed covered in a quilt Evelyn had stitched herself. They never missed a birthday, a school play, or a soccer game. "Grandchildren are life's reward," Evelyn once told me over coffee, her eyes crinkling at the corners as she watched Lily and Noah playing in the yard. Looking back now, I can see the cracks in the foundation, the places where the illusion was thin enough to see through. But at the time, I saw only what I wanted to see: a family bound by love, a childhood of warmth and security, parents who cherished me. I had no idea that beneath the surface of all that affection lay a darkness so profound it would eventually swallow me whole. The first crack appeared when I was 24, home for Thanksgiving after my first year of graduate school. We were gathered around the dining table, Evelyn's china gleaming under the chandelier, when my Aunt Ruth, Evelyn's sister, made a comment that didn't quite fit. "You've always been so resilient, Clara," she said, her voice slightly too loud, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Not everyone would have turned out so given everything. I paused with my fork halfway to my mouth. Given what? The table fell silent. Evelyn's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. David cleared his throat, a sound I'd come to recognize as discomfort. "Oh, Ruth said, waving her hand dismissively. "Just, life can be complicated sometimes. But you've always been a fighter." Before I could press further, Evelyn changed the subject with practiced ease, asking about my studies, my apartment, my friends. The moment passed, but something lingered, a question without an answer, a feeling that I'd missed something important. I told myself I was overthinking it. Ruth had always been a bit dramatic, prone to vague statements that meant nothing. Still, as I helped Evelyn clear the dishes later, I noticed how carefully she avoided my eyes, how her hands moved with unusual precision, as if by controlling her immediate environment, she could control something larger, something threatening to escape. "Is everything okay with Aunt Ruth?" I asked, setting a stack of plates on the counter. Evelyn's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. Why wouldn't it be? She just said something strange about me being resilient. It felt like there was more to it. Evelyn turned to face me, her expression carefully neutral. "Your aunt loves you, Clara. She's proud of how you've grown up, that's all." She paused, then added, "Sometimes people say things without realizing how they'll sound. Don't read too much into it." I nodded, accepting her explanation, but the unease remained, a small stone in my shoe that I couldn't quite shake off. A few months later, another crack appeared. I was home for spring break, helping David clean out the garage when I came across a box of old photographs. Most were family pictures, vacations, birthdays, holidays, but one caught my attention. It was a photo of Evelyn, visibly pregnant, standing in what appeared to be a hospital corridor. She looked exhausted, her smile forced, her eyes distant. "Where was this taken?" I asked, showing the photo to David. He glanced at it briefly before turning away. "Just a checkup, I think. Your mother had a difficult pregnancy with you. I don't remember you ever mentioning that." David shrugged, reaching for a stack of old newspapers. "It was a long time ago. Nothing worth dwelling on." His voice was casual, but there was an edge to it, a warning not to ask more questions. I set the photo aside, intending to ask Evelyn about it later, but when I did, she dismissed it with a wave of her hand. "All pregnancies are difficult in their own way, sweet girl. You are worth every moment of discomfort." Her words should have reassured me, but instead, they felt rehearsed, as if she'd said them many times before, to convince herself as much as me. That night, lying in my childhood bed, I found myself wondering what else I didn't know about my own history, what other stories had been carefully edited or omitted entirely. The cracks continued to appear, small inconsistencies that I mostly rationalized away. A conversation I overheard between my parents that stopped abruptly when I entered the room. The way Evelyn sometimes looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, part sadness, part regret, before her face smoothed into a smile. David's occasional references to the sacrifices we've made that were never fully explained. Each time, I told myself I was imagining things, that every family had their secrets, their unspoken tensions. I was an adult now, with my own life, my own challenges. It was easy to dismiss these moments as products of my own overactive imagination, to focus instead on my studies, my relationship with Nathan, my plans for the future. But the unease continued to grow, a persistent hum beneath the surface of our family interactions. Sometimes, late at night, I'd find myself replaying conversations, examining memories for clues I might have missed. I began to notice patterns, how my parents never really talked about the year I was born, how they changed the subject when I asked about their early marriage, how certain family friends were never mentioned anymore. Once, when I was 28, visiting with Nathan and 6-month-old Lily, I found Evelyn sitting alone in the garden after dinner, staring into the distance with a hollowed-out expression I'd never seen before. "Everything okay, Mom?" I asked, sitting beside her on the bench. She started, as if I'd pulled her from a great distance. "Oh, Clara. Yes, everything's fine." She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just thinking about how quickly time passes. One day you're young with your whole life ahead of you, and the next." She trailed off, shaking her head slightly. "The next what?" "Nothing, sweet girl. Just an old woman's ramblings." She patted my hand, her touch cool and distant. "Enjoy every moment with Lily. They grow up so fast." As we sat there in the fading light, I felt a chasm opening between us, a space filled with words unspoken, stories untold. I wanted to ask her what was really on her mind, to break through the careful facade she maintained, but something held me back, a fear that the answer might be more than I could handle. Instead, I just nodded and said, "I know. Sometimes I look at her and can't believe she's real." Evelyn's smile softened, became almost genuine. "She's beautiful, Clara. You've always had a gift for creating beauty wherever you go." The words sounded like a compliment, but there was an undertone I couldn't quite identify, a wistfulness, perhaps, or a sadness that went deeper than the ordinary nostalgia of a grandmother watching her grandchild grow. In the months that followed, these moments became more frequent, more difficult to dismiss. I began to feel like an archaeologist of my own life, carefully brushing away layers of carefully constructed narrative to find something different underneath. Each small inconsistency was a clue, a piece of a puzzle I didn't know I was solving. The tipping point came on a rainy Tuesday in March. I was at my parents' house for lunch, David having called to ask if I could help him with some paperwork related to their wills. Evelyn was out at her book club, leaving just the two of us in the quiet house. "We're getting older, Clara," David said as we sat at the kitchen table, documents spread between us. "It's important to have these things in order." I nodded, scanning the legal language that blurred together in meaningless paragraphs. "Of course. I'm glad you're being proactive." David hesitated, his fingers tapping a nervous rhythm on the table. "There's something else I wanted to discuss, something your mother and I have been considering." "What is it?" He took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into deep water. "We've been thinking about the future. About what happens when we're gone." My stomach tightened. "Dad, you're both healthy. You have decades ahead of you." Of course, he said quickly, holding up his hands. "But these things need to be planned. And there's the matter of the house, of our assets." I waited, sensing there was more he wasn't saying. "We've decided to leave everything to you and Nathan," he continued. "The house, the savings, everything. But there's a condition." "A condition?" David nodded, not meeting my eyes. "We want you to promise that you'll never go through our personal papers after we're gone. No diaries, no letters, no private documents. Some things are better left buried." The request struck me as odd, out of character for my straightforward father. "Why would you ask that?" "I wouldn't invade your privacy. It's just important to us, Clara. Some memories are painful and there's no reason for you to carry them after we're gone." He finally looked at me, his expression pleading. "Can you promise me that?" Yes, of course, I said, though confusion clouded my mind. "But I don't understand why you're so concerned about this." David stood abruptly, gathering the papers. It's nothing, really. Just an old man's worries. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Now, how about some lunch? Your mother left soup in the fridge. As we ate, the conversation shifted to safer topics: Nathan's promotion, Lily's latest milestones, David's golf game. But the request echoed in my mind, a strange note in the familiar melody of our family life. Why would my parents be so concerned about me finding something after they were gone? What could be so painful that they wanted to ensure it remained hidden forever? That night, lying in bed beside Nathan, I found myself replaying the conversation, examining each word for hidden meaning. Some memories are painful, David had said. What memories? What could be so terrible that it needed to be buried even after death? The question took root in my mind, growing with each passing day. I began to notice other things: how Evelyn sometimes watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read, how David occasionally referred to the choices we made without elaboration, how certain family photographs were conspicuously absent from the albums displayed in the living room. A month after David's strange request, I was at my parents' house helping Evelyn organize the hall closet when I came across a small locked box tucked away on a high shelf. "What's this?" I asked, lifting it down. Evelyn's composure faltered for just a moment. "Oh, just some old keepsakes. Nothing important. Do you have the key?" "I'm curious what's inside." Her smile tightened. "I think I've misplaced it, actually. Why don't you leave that box and help me with these winter coats instead?" I set the box aside, but my curiosity was piqued. Later that evening, when Evelyn was distracted in the garden, I returned to the closet and examined the box more closely. It was a simple wooden container with a small brass lock, nothing particularly valuable in appearance, but the care with which it had been hidden suggested its contents were important. As I turned it over in my hands, I noticed something scratched into the bottom: initials, ERD, and a date, June 12th, the year I was born. My heart raced as I slipped the box into my bag. I knew I was crossing a line, violating the trust my parents had placed in me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this box held answers to questions I hadn't even known to ask. That night, after Nathan and the children were asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with the box between my hands. The lock was simple, and a small screwdriver from the junk drawer was enough to spring it open. Inside, nestled in faded velvet lining, were several items: a hospital bracelet with my name on it, a yellowed newspaper clipping about a local charity event, and a small, leather-bound diary with Evelyn's initials embossed on the cover. My hands trembled as I opened the diary to the first entry, dated January of the year I was born. The elegant cursive was familiar from countless birthday cards and notes left on the kitchen counter, but the words were anything but the warm sentiments I expected. "David and I had the worst fight of our marriage last night," the entry began. "He wants to keep the baby, says it's too late for other options." I tried to explain that this isn't what I wanted, that this changes everything we planned. "He doesn't understand, or worse, he doesn't care." I stared at the words, unable to process their meaning. This couldn't be about me. My parents had always spoken of my birth as a joyous occasion, the fulfillment of their dreams. I turned the page, my heart pounding against my ribs. The next entry was dated a week later. "I went to the doctor alone today. David couldn't get away from work, or perhaps he couldn't face it. The nurse asked if I was excited about becoming a mother, and I almost laughed. How do you tell a stranger that you feel trapped, that every kick feels like a reminder of a future you never chose?" Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading, each entry more devastating than the last. My mother, my warm, loving, seemingly perfect mother, had been devastated by my impending birth. She had felt trapped, resentful, regretful. The final entry, dated 3 days after my birth, was the most crushing of all. "Clara was born this morning. She has my eyes, everyone says, as if that's supposed to mean something. David held her and cried, but I couldn't even touch her. Every time I look at her, I see the end of my dreams, the life I could have had. David says I'll learn to love her, that it's just hormones, but I wonder if some parts of you can be broken so badly they never heal. I regret the day Clara was born, and David agrees with me. The diary slipped from my grasp, landing softly on the table. The world tilted, spun, then righted itself into something unrecognizable. Everything I believed about my life, my family, my very identity had been built on a foundation of lies. I sat there in the silent kitchen, the diary's words echoing in my mind, until the first light of dawn crept through the window. My body felt heavy, disconnected, as if I were watching myself from a great distance. How could I go on as if nothing had changed? How could I face my mother, my father, knowing what I now knew? The decision came suddenly, with a clarity that surprised me. I needed answers. I needed to confront them, to understand how they could have spent 32 years pretending, how they could have looked at me with love in their eyes while hiding such a devastating truth. I called in sick to work, sent Nathan and the children to my in-laws for the day, then drove to my parents' house, the diary burning a hole in my bag. The morning was bright, beautiful, a cruel contrast to the darkness inside me. Evelyn was in the garden, pruning roses with practiced precision. She looked up as I approached, her smile faltering when she saw my face. "Clara? What's wrong? Is it one of the children?" I didn't answer, just held up the diary. Her face went pale, the pruning shears falling from her grasp and landing in the grass with a soft thud. "Where did you get that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "In the locked box in the closet. The one you told me you'd lost the key to." She swayed slightly, reaching out to steady herself against the trellis. "You weren't supposed to find that." We agreed. I interrupted, my voice shaking with rage and hurt. "Who agreed? You and Dad? That you'd hide the truth about how you really felt about me?" Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, but her expression remained defiant. "It's not what you think, Clara. Things were complicated then. We were young, with plans that didn't include children so soon." "Soon? Mom, the diary makes it clear you didn't want children at all. You regretted my birth before I was even born." Her composure crumbled. "I was scared, Clara. I was 23, with a scholarship to study abroad, dreams of becoming an artist. Your birth changed all of that." "And Dad? What about his part in this?" "The diary said he agreed with you. Your father, he wanted what was best for me, for us. He thought keeping you would ruin my chances at happiness." "So what changed?" I demanded, my voice rising. "What made you decide to play the part of loving parents for 32 years? Evelyn sank onto a nearby bench, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "We tried, Clara. We really did. When I held you for the first time, something shifted. I thought I could learn to love you, that the resentment would fade with time." "And did it? Did you ever learn to love me, or was it all just acting?" She looked up at me, her face ravaged by grief. "Of course I love you. How could you even ask that? How could I not ask?" I shot back, tears streaming down my face. "Your diary says you regretted the day I was born. How am I supposed to reconcile that with the mother who baked cookies and read bedtime stories and told me I was her special girl? Which one was real? Was any of it real?" "Both," she whispered. "Both were real. The regret was real, but so was the love that grew over time. People are complicated, Clara. Love is complicated." "Complicated?" I laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "That's what you call this? 32 years of deception, of making me believe I was wanted, that I was cherished? That's not complicated, Mom. That's cruel." As we sat there in the garden, surrounded by the beauty Evelyn had cultivated, I felt something inside me breaking, shattering into pieces that could never be put back together. The woman who had been my anchor, my role model, my confidant, was suddenly a stranger, her motivations incomprehensible, her love conditional and compromised. "I need to talk to Dad," I said finally, standing up on legs that felt barely strong enough to support me. Evelyn reached for my hand, her touch cold and foreign. "Clara, please. Don't. What purpose can it serve to hurt him too?" "The truth," I said, pulling away. "The truth might not set me free, but at least it will be honest." I found David in his study, surrounded by books and photographs, the familiar sanctuary of my childhood. He looked up as I entered, his smile fading when he saw my expression. "Clara? What's wrong? Is your mother okay?" "I found Mom's diary, Dad. The one from the year I was born." The color drained from his face. He stood up so quickly that his chair tipped over, hitting the floor with a loud crash. "Where did you?" "In the locked box. The one you asked me never to look through after you were gone." "Was that to protect me, or to protect yourselves?" David sank into his chair, his face in his hands. "We never wanted you to know, Clara. We wanted to spare you the pain." "The pain of what? Of knowing my own mother didn't want me? Of knowing my father agreed that my birth was a mistake?" He looked up, his eyes filled with an anguish so deep it took my breath away. "It wasn't like that." "Not exactly." "Then what was it like, Dad?" Because the diary was pretty clear. "I regret the day Clara was born, and David agrees with me." David's shoulders slumped in defeat. "Your mother was devastated, Clara. She had dreams, plans. A baby wasn't part of them, not then. And you? What was your part in all this?" "I wanted to support her," he said quietly. "I loved her more than anything, and she was in so much pain. I thought if we could just get through it, if we could make the best of it, everything would work out." "So you agreed that I was a mistake? That my birth ruined your plans?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "Never that. But I did agree that it complicated things, that it changed the path we thought we were on." "Changed the path," I repeated, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. "That's a gentle way of saying you resented me for existing." "We didn't resent you, Clara. We resented the circumstances, the timing." "It's different." "Is it?" I demanded, my voice cracking with emotion. "Because from where I'm standing, it feels pretty much the same. You spent 32 years looking at me, talking to me, touching me, all while knowing you wished I'd never been born. How did you do it? How did you lie so convincingly for so long?" David's face crumpled. "We didn't lie, not really. We just omitted. We focused on the good, on the love that grew over time. Your mother was right about one thing: people are complicated. We can hold contradictory truths at the same time." "What contradictory truths?" "That you loved me but wished I didn't exist? That you were proud of me but regretted my birth? Those aren't contradictions, Dad. Those are incompatibilities." He stood up and moved toward me, his hands outstretched as if to touch me, then dropping to his sides when he saw me flinch away. "Clara, what we felt in those first months, even years, it doesn't define the entirety of our relationship with you. We raised you, we cherished you, we loved you. Doesn't that count for anything?" "It counts for everything," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "That's what makes this so devastating. If you had been cold, distant, unloving, this would make sense. But you weren't. You were warm, engaged, seemingly proud of me at every turn. How do I reconcile those two versions of you? How do I understand which one was real?" "Both were real," he said, echoing Evelyn's words from the garden. "The initial regret was real, but so was the love that developed. One didn't cancel out the other." "I don't understand that," I said, shaking my head. "I don't understand how you could hold both truths at once." "Because that's what being human is, Clara. It's messy and complicated and full of contradictions. We can love someone and still mourn what we've lost. We can cherish what we have while still wondering what might have been." As I stood there in my father's study, surrounded by 32 years of carefully curated family history, I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. The foundation of my identity had been cracked, perhaps irreparably. Who was I, if not the wanted child of loving parents? What did my life mean, if it began as a regret, a complication, a deviation from a preferred path? "I need to go," I said finally, turning toward the door. "Clara, wait," David called after me. "Please don't leave like this. We need to talk more to explain." "There's nothing more to explain," I said, not turning around. The diary said it all. As I drove away from my childhood home, the diary burning a hole in the passenger seat beside me, I felt something inside me collapsing, a structure I hadn't even known was fragile until it shattered. The world outside the car window continued as normal, people walking their dogs, children playing in yards, mail carriers making their rounds, but my world had been fundamentally altered, irrevocably changed. I drove aimlessly for hours, the landscape blurring through my tears. Eventually, I found myself at the lake where we'd spent so many family vacations, the cabin now closed for the season. I sat on the dock, my feet dangling above the water, and tried to make sense of the incomprehensible. How could two people who had seemingly loved me so completely have begun with such regret? How could they have hidden it so perfectly for so many years? And most painfully, how could I have been so blind, so trusting, so completely unaware of the truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along? The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that felt like a mockery of my internal darkness. I knew I couldn't stay there forever, lost in the wreckage of my past. I had a husband who loved me, children who depended on me, a life that needed to continue even as I felt certain parts of myself dying. But as I sat there, watching the day fade into night, I also knew that something fundamental had changed. The person I had been that morning, secure in the knowledge of her parents' love, confident in her place in the world, was gone, replaced by someone new, someone fractured and uncertain. Someone who would need to learn how to live with the devastating truth of her own beginning. The first few weeks after the confrontation were a blur of pain and disorientation. I moved through my days like a ghost, performing the necessary tasks of motherhood and work while feeling hollowed out inside. I'd wake up in the morning and for a few precious moments, I'd forget, then the memory would crash over me like a wave, leaving me gasping for breath. Nathan noticed the change immediately. "You've been distant," he said one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. "Is everything okay?" How could I explain? How could I put into words the magnitude of what I discovered, the way it had shattered my understanding of myself and my place in the world? "Just tired," I said, avoiding his eyes. "Work has been stressful." Nathan nodded, but I could see the concern in his expression. He knew there was more I wasn't saying, but he also knew not to push, to give me space until I was ready to share. The children, too, sensed something was wrong. Lily, usually so cheerful and outgoing, became clingy, following me from room to room. Noah, who had just started talking, began waking up in the night, calling for me with a urgency that broke my heart. "Mama," he'd cry, his small voice piercing the darkness. "Mama, come." I'd go to him, holding his small body against mine, breathing in his baby scent, and wonder, did they know? Could they sense that their mother was broken, that her foundation had been cracked beyond repair? My parents tried to contact me several times, calls that went unanswered, emails that remained unopened, letters that sat unopened on the counter. Part of me wanted to respond, to demand more answers, to somehow make sense of the incomprehensible. But another part of me, the larger, more wounded part, couldn't bear to hear their voices, to see their faces, knowing what I now knew. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the confrontation, Harper came over unannounced, finding me sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by photo albums I hadn't looked at in years. Clara, she said softly, closing the door behind her. Nathan called. He's worried about you. I looked up, my vision blurred with tears. Did he tell you? Tell me what? Just that you've been different, distant, sad. I gestured to the albums spread around me. I was looking for the truth, for clues I might have missed. Harper sat beside me, her presence warm and steady. What truth, sweetie? What's going on? And so I told her everything, the diary, the confrontation, the devastating realization that my existence had begun as a regret. As I spoke, the words poured out of me, a torrent of pain and confusion I hadn't realized I'd been holding back. Harper listened without interrupting, her expression growing more horrified with each revelation. When I finished, she pulled me into a hug, her arms strong around me. "Oh, Clara," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I can't imagine how painful this must be." I cried against her shoulder, releasing weeks of pent-up grief. How could they, Harper? How could they lie for so long? "I don't know," she said, stroking my hair. "I really don't. But whatever their reasons, whatever happened 32 years ago, it doesn't change who you are now. It doesn't change the fact that you're kind and smart and loving and so deeply loved by so many people." "But am I?" I asked, pulling away to look at her. "Am I any of those things, or am I just the product of 32 years of acting? Of people pretending to feel something they didn't?" Harper took my hands in hers. "Feelings can change, Clara. People can change. The regret they felt then doesn't negate the love they feel now. Both can be true." "That's what they said," I said, shaking my head. "But I don't understand how that works. How can you regret someone's existence and still love them?" "I think," Harper said slowly, "that sometimes we love people despite the circumstances that brought them into our lives. We can love the person while still mourning what might have been. It's not logical, but love rarely is." As we sat there on the living room floor, surrounded by decades of carefully curated family memories, I felt something shift inside me, not healing, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding, of acceptance that the truth might be more complicated than I wanted it to be. That evening, after Harper had left and the children were asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a pen and paper, trying to make sense of the jumble of thoughts and emotions swirling through my mind. "Dear Mom and Dad," I began, then crossed it out. The formality felt wrong, too distant for the intimacy of our shared history. "Evelyn." "David," I tried next, then stopped again. The use of their first names felt like an accusation, a rejection of the parental roles they had played for 32 years. In the end, I settled on something simpler, something that acknowledged the complexity of our relationship without denying its reality. "I don't know how to do this," I wrote. "I don't know how to talk to you, how to look at you, how to reconcile the parents I thought I had with the parents I've discovered. The pain is so immense sometimes I can barely breathe. But I also know that cutting you off completely isn't the answer, not for me, not for our family. I need time. I need space. But I also need, eventually, to understand. Not to forgive. I don't know if I can ever forgive this, but to understand how the people who raised me, who seemed to love me so completely, could have begun with such regret. I need to understand how you lived with that truth, how you hid it so perfectly, how you looked at me every day knowing what you knew. When I'm ready, I want to talk. Really talk, without deflections or justifications. Until then, please give me the space I need to process this impossible truth." I read the letter over several times, then sealed it in an envelope, not sure if I would ever send it, but needing to put the words into existence, to give form to the formless pain that had become my constant companion. The next morning, I drove to the post office, my hands trembling as I slipped the letter into the slot. As I watched it disappear into the darkness, I felt a small sense of release, as if by acknowledging the need for eventual communication, I was taking the first step toward whatever came next. In the weeks that followed, I began the slow, painful work of rebuilding my understanding of myself and my history. I started therapy, sitting across from a kind-eyed woman named Dr. Ruth who listened patiently as I unpacked decades of carefully constructed beliefs. "Identity is complex," she said one afternoon, as I described the feeling of being unmoored, of not knowing who I was anymore. "We build it from many sources: our experiences, our relationships, our beliefs about ourselves. When one of those fundamental sources is shaken, it's natural to feel disoriented. But how do I rebuild?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How do I integrate this new, painful truth with the life I thought I had?" "Slowly," she said, her expression compassionate. "And with compassion for yourself. You're grieving, Clara. Not just the loss of your parents' love as you understood it, but the loss of your own story, your own beginning. That's a profound loss, and it deserves to be mourned." I nodded, tears welling in my eyes. "I feel so angry sometimes. So betrayed. But then I feel guilty for being angry, because they did raise me, they did care for me. It's all so confusing." "Feelings aren't mutually exclusive," Dr. Ruth reminded me. "You can feel love and anger simultaneously. You can appreciate the care they provided while still mourning the circumstances of your birth. The human heart has room for contradictions." As the months passed, the sharp edges of my pain began to soften, though the ache remained constant, a background hum to my daily life. I started to notice small changes in myself, a new wariness, a tendency to question people's motivations, a heightened sensitivity to signs of inauthenticity. Once, at a playground with Lily and Noah, I watched another mother interact with her child, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, her words of praise sounding rehearsed. Something inside me tightened, a familiar nod of distrust. "Everything okay?" Nathan asked, noticing my expression. "Fine," I said, turning away. "Just thinking." But I wasn't just thinking. I was analyzing, comparing, searching for signs of the same deception that had characterized my own upbringing. Would I ever be able to trust in the authenticity of others' love? Would I always be looking for the hidden diary, the locked box, the truth lurking behind the carefully constructed facade? These questions haunted me as I moved through my days, performing the rituals of motherhood with a new awareness of their potential for deception. When I told Lily she was my sunshine, my greatest joy, I wondered, was I being completely honest? Or was there some small part of me that, like my own mother, held back some reservation, some unspoken truth? The thought was terrifying, a suggestion that I might somehow repeat the patterns of my own upbringing, passing on the legacy of conditional love and hidden truths. "I'm scared," I confessed to Nathan one night as we lay in the darkness of our bedroom. "I'm scared that I don't know how to love unconditionally, that I don't even know what that looks like." Nathan rolled onto his side, propping himself up on one elbow. "What are you talking about? You're an amazing mother. The kids adore you, and with good reason. But am I being honest with them? With myself?" I asked, my voice trembling. "How can I be, when my own beginning was based on a lie?" "Clara," he said, taking my hand. "Look at me. Your parents' choices, their feelings, their regrets, that's their story, not yours. Your story is how you've chosen to live, how you've chosen to love. And I've seen how you love our children. It's real, it's authentic, it's unconditional." I wanted to believe him, wanted to trust in the reality of the love I felt for my family, but the doubt remained, a persistent whisper in the quiet moments of my life. In October, 6 months after I'd discovered the diary, I received a letter from Evelyn. The envelope was familiar, her elegant address on the front, but the weight of it in my hands felt different, heavier with unspoken words. I waited until Nathan had taken the children to the park, then sat at the kitchen table, my heart pounding as I opened it. "My dearest Clara," it began, the words already blurred by my tears. "I've been waiting, hoping you might be ready to hear from me. If you're not, I understand." But I needed to try to explain, not to justify my actions, but to help you understand something of the complexity of the human heart. When I was young, I had dreams that didn't include motherhood. I wanted to travel, to paint, to see the world. When I discovered I was pregnant with you, those dreams felt like they were dying, and I mourned them deeply. The words in that diary were born of that grief, of the fear that I was losing myself, my identity, my future. But then you were born, Clara. You had my eyes, yes, but you also had a spirit that captivated me from the beginning. As I held you, as I got to know you, something shifted inside me. The grief didn't disappear entirely, but it made room for something new, for a love so profound it frightened me. The truth is, I did regret the circumstances of your birth. But I never, ever regretted you. Not from the moment I truly saw you, not from the moment I understood that you weren't an ending to my dreams, but a beginning to new ones I couldn't yet imagine. We kept the truth from you not to deceive you, but to protect you from our own complicated feelings, from the messy reality of how families are sometimes formed, from the knowledge that love can grow from the most unexpected soil. I understand if you can't forgive us. I understand if you need more time. But please know this. Whatever I felt 32 years ago, it has been eclipsed by 32 years of knowing you, of watching you grow into the remarkable woman you've become. You are not, and have never been, a regret. You are, and have always been, my greatest love. Your mother, Evelyn. I read the letter 3 times, then a 4th, my tears staining the paper until the words blurred into illegibility. Part of me wanted to reject her explanation, to hold on to my anger and hurt as a shield against further pain. But another part of me, the part that remembered her gentle hands on my fevered forehead, her voice reading bedtime stories, her pride beaming from the audience at every school play, recognized the truth in her words. Love is complicated. People are complicated. We can hold contradictory truths at the same time. That evening, I sat on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, and thought about the nature of truth, about how it can be both absolute and relative, how it can shift and change depending on perspective. My parents had regretted the circumstances of my birth, but not me specifically. They had mourned the loss of their original dreams, but had found new dreams in raising me. They had hidden the truth not to deceive me, but to protect me from what, I wasn't entirely sure, but perhaps from the knowledge that even the deepest love can have complicated beginnings. The realization didn't erase the pain, didn't undo the betrayal I felt, but it did soften the edges, create space for a more nuanced understanding of what had happened, of who my parents were flawed. Complicated human beings who had made difficult choices and lived with the consequences. I wasn't ready to forgive them, not yet. Perhaps I never would be completely. But for the first time since discovering the diary, I could imagine a future where the truth didn't shatter me, where I could integrate this painful knowledge into the larger story of my life without letting it define me entirely. The next morning, I called Evelyn. The phone rang several times before she answered, her voice hesitant when she realized it was me. Clara. Hi, Mom, I said, the word feeling both strange and familiar on my tongue. I got your letter. There was a pause, then her voice came back, thick with emotion. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure either, I admitted. I'm still angry. I'm still hurt. But I'm also trying to understand. Whatever you need, Clara, she said, her voice breaking. However long it takes. I know, I said, looking out the window at Nathan pushing Lily on the swing, Noah toddling behind them. I'm not ready to see you yet. But I wanted you to know that I read your letter, that I'm thinking about what you said. That's more than I hoped for, she said quietly. Thank you. After we hung up, I stood at the window for a long time, watching my family move through the sunny afternoon. The pain was still there, a constant ache beneath the surface of my days, but something else was there too, a glimmer of hope, perhaps, or at least the possibility of eventual peace. In the months that followed, I began the slow work of reconciliation, not with my parents, not yet, but with myself. I started writing again, something I hadn't done since college, filling journals with thoughts and memories, questions and revelations. I explored the complicated landscape of my own heart, examining the ways in which my parents' deception had shaped me, the fears and insecurities it had planted, the strengths it had unexpectedly forged. I also began to notice the ways in which my experience had connected me to others, the stranger in the grocery store who shared a story of her own complicated family history, the friend who confessed her own doubts about motherhood, the client at work who spoke of the adopted child she loved despite not having been able to conceive. These stories didn't erase my pain, but they placed it in a larger context, reminded me that the human experience is universally messy and complicated. One afternoon in early spring, a year after I discovered the diary, I found myself back at my parents' house, standing in the garden where I had confronted Evelyn. The roses were beginning to bloom, their petals unfurling in the warm sunlight. "I was wondering when you might come," David said, appearing at the back door. He looked older, more fragile than I remembered, his shoulders stooped with a weight I now understood. "I'm not sure why I'm here," I admitted, my hands tucked into my pockets. "I just felt drawn." David nodded, approaching slowly as if afraid I might bolt. "Your mother's inside. She'll want to see you, but only if you're ready." I took a deep breath, the air fragrant with the scent of roses and damp earth. "I think I might be." As we stepped into the house, into the familiar warmth of the kitchen where I had eaten countless meals, where I had celebrated birthdays and holidays, where I had shared my dreams and fears, I felt something shift inside me. Not a return to the blind trust of my earlier life, but something new, something more complex and perhaps more authentic. Evelyn was waiting in the living room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When she saw me, she stood up, her expression a mixture of hope and fear. "Clara," she whispered, as if afraid the word might break something. "Mom," I responded, the feeling of it both strange and familiar. We stood there for a moment, suspended in the space between past and present, between the truth I had discovered and the future we might yet create. Then Evelyn stepped forward, her arms open, and I found myself moving toward her, into an embrace that felt both familiar and entirely new. As we held each other, the years of deception and pain suspended between us, I understood something I hadn't before. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or excusing what had happened. It was about acknowledging the complexity of the human heart, about accepting that love and regret can coexist, that people can be both good and flawed, that truth can be multifaceted and contradictory. "I'm sorry," Evelyn whispered against my hair. "For everything." "I know," I said, pulling back to look at her. "And I'm working on understanding." David joined us, his hand resting on my shoulder, and for the first time in a year, I felt the possibility of something new emerging from the wreckage of the past, not a return to what we had been, but the creation of something different, something more honest and perhaps more resilient. Later that afternoon, as I sat in the garden with my parents, the sunlight filtering through the leaves above us, I realized that the discovery of the diary hadn't just been about uncovering a painful truth. It had also been about discovering my own strength, my own capacity for survival and growth in the face of devastating betrayal. The wound would always be there, a scar on my heart that might never fully heal. But I was learning to live with it, to integrate it into the larger story of who I was and who I was becoming. I was learning that identity isn't built on a single foundation, but on many, on experiences and relationships, on failures and triumphs, on truths both painful and liberating. As I drove home that evening, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, I thought about the diary entry that had shattered my world, about the words that had seemed so definitive, so absolute. I regret the day Clara was born. And David agrees with me. Now, a year later, I understood that those words were only part of a larger, more complex story, a story of grief and growth, of loss and love, of the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of human connection. The truth wasn't simple or easy, but it was real, and in its reality, there was a kind of freedom, the freedom to embrace complexity, to accept contradiction, to love and be loved despite the imperfections that make us human. When I walked into my own house, Nathan and the children greeted me with the uncomplicated enthusiasm that had become my anchor in the storm of the past year. As I hugged them, breathing in the familiar sense of my family, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, not the peace of forgetting or of resolution, but the peace of acceptance, of understanding that some questions don't have simple answers, that some wounds don't fully close, that some truths are worth the pain of discovering. That night, as I lay in bed beside Nathan, the house quiet around me, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment, through pain and anger, through confusion and grief, to this place of fragile but growing acceptance. The diary had said I was regretted, had said my existence was a complication, a deviation from a preferred path. But as I drifted off to sleep, surrounded by the love I had built with my own family, I understood something profound. Our beginnings don't have to define our endings. The circumstances of our birth don't have to determine the trajectory of our lives. We are all, in our own ways, products of complicated histories, of messy beginnings, of truths both painful and liberating. And in that complexity, in that messiness, there is a kind of beauty, a beauty that comes from surviving, from growing, from loving despite the pain, from creating meaning out of the materials we've been given, however imperfect they might be. The diary had been the end of one story, but it was also the beginning of another, a story of resilience and growth, of understanding and acceptance, of a love that could accommodate contradiction and complexity. And as I slept, I dreamed not of the past that had been lost, but of the future that was still being created, one day at a time, one truth at a time, one moment of authentic connection at a time. The wound remained, a scar on my heart that might never fully fade. But I was learning to live with it, to integrate it into the larger story of who I was and who I was becoming. I was learning that the most painful truths can sometimes lead to the most profound understanding, that the deepest wounds can sometimes become the source of our greatest strength. And in that understanding, there was a kind of peace, not the peace of forgetting or of resolution, but the peace of acceptance, of knowing that we are all, in our own ways, works in progress, navigating the complicated terrain of love and loss, of truth and deception, of beginning and ending and beginning again. The diary had said I was regretted, had said my father agreed. But as I moved forward into the future, carrying both the pain and the love of my complicated history, I understood that those words were only part of the story, a story that was still being written, a story that I, in my own imperfect, authentic way, had the power to continue shaping, one day at a time, one truth at a time, one moment of genuine connection at a time.